So we have this CWIS framework that has a lot of words, so I apologize for that in advance, but I think if you just look at the top bars and the sidebars, we can get to the highest level view of what CWIS, what we want to take into consideration with CWIS. And I think we start from the point of saying, what are the key things that we want from city sanitation? And that is at the very highest level, we can kind of talk about the details of what we want in any given city, but at the highest level, we want something that's equitable, safe, and services that are sustained. That's what every city wants for its population in a lot of different sectors, but especially in sanitation. In order to get to those outcomes, because of the nature of the way sanitation is, you have to have certain functions in place to organize your market. And one of the reasons that, like when I say the nature of sanitation, just one important component of sanitation that is different from a lot of other market goods is that the private sector component, what you need as an individual, having a place to go to the bathroom and having it be moved away from you and your space, that happens independently of whether or not that waste gets treated and whether or not that approach to serving your own individual needs has externalities or negative effects on the city. And that distinction that allows a market, an individual customer to buy what they need and externalize the downsides or the negative aspects of sanitation to others is what requires governance and what requires this public sector approach. So the public sector approach, again, trying to really level up and not anchor to any one approach or another. We wanted to look at the functions. What is it needed in a public service market in order to achieve these outcomes? Again, independent of whether you're working through a utility or a municipality or a state or other institutional arrangements that might characterize a specific governance approach or another. So the three things that are important are responsibilities. Some government entity has to be responsible. Again, that doesn't mean that they are responsible for delivering the sanitation. It means that they're responsible for ensuring that it gets delivered. And that can be through private sector providers. It can be through concessions. It can be through direct delivery from the public sector, or it can be from a mix of those. The second question is accountability. And once you have a mandated authority that has the responsibility to deliver services, to ensure services are delivered, that mandated authority is given the right to collect money in a lot of cases for services. And with that comes the responsibility to actually achieve service level outcomes. And so accountability talks about kind of who do they have to report to? If they've been given a mandate, who knows whether they're actually meeting that mandate? And what is the function to ensure that they're meeting that? And then finally, how are resources being planned and managed to ensure that this mandate can be met? Because the individual authority doesn't necessarily have the ability to generate revenue at the local level in order to finance long-term investments at a city level. So again, if you think about your own city for a moment, you can use this framework to just at a high level walk through kind of how well are you organized to achieve your outcomes, and where do you see gaps in your own context? Is there a clear authority with a public mandate to ensure safe, equitable, sustainable sanitation, or is there a mandate to just do sewers? Or is that mandate split and one entity has a mandate for sewers and another entity has a mandate for non-sewerage sanitation? Sorry, and then is that mandate inclusive is another really important component. A lot of times there's a mandate, but it's restricted to a certain service area, or it includes provisions that exclude responsibility of the authority to serve, let's say, informal communities. And when those exclusions are built into your mandate, you're not going to get inclusive services, and you're not going to be able to serve those who need it most. Again, accountability is once you have an authority with a mandate, how is their performance against that mandate monitored? Is there data available for monitoring? And are there, in the best case scenario, not only data and transparency associated with how that performance is monitored, but also incentives to perform? I think my kids, I feel like my kids might have woken up and are scribbling on my slides. I don't know where that came from. I kind of like it. So the third function is resource management and planning. And in resource management and planning, again, it's looking at kind of who's responsible for managing finances at a national level and at a city level. Are there revenues? Are there ring-fenced revenues? Is there a costed strategy? Is there an accounting system that allows you to determine as an authority whether or not your revenues are covering your costs, and how you need to raise financing from other sources? An important component of all three of these functions, well, I'll get to the next slide. So when you think about that organization of the market using those three functions, or looking to support those three functions, effectively, that's helping to put the outcomes first. And what I think, maybe I should have put this slide a little bit earlier, but this is that's the framework for CWIS. And then kind of what is it more broadly, again, to reiterate what's different with CWIS relative to FSM or just kind of business as usual. And so this slide just shows you there's a traditional approach to urban sanitation, and then there's the kind of NSS FSM approach that has been highlighted in the past few years. And when you bring those together, the goal is to kind of address the missing components of each approach, bring them together, and really put people first, and look at how services get delivered to people. And a few points that I wanted to highlight from this slide. You can go through kind of some of the weaknesses of the traditional approach, which is it's sewer intensive. It doesn't reach the vast majority of folks. I think for those of you who are on the call, that was covered well in the video. And the FSM approach, which is often projectized and was intended to reach the poorest a lot of times, but often because of the way the projects worked, it often not only missed the poor, but then often ended too soon after the projects ended. And so bringing those together and really focusing in on the setting up those functions and institutionalizing them at a government public service level is what gets us this outcome of services. The key things that I wanted to pull out here are the gender and social equity component. It is insufficient to say that you're going to deliver your mainstream services to low-income communities. And it's insufficient to say, well, we have to reach women, and so we want to measure how many women we're reaching, and we want to employ X number of women. Gender equity means that different genders need different things. And social equity often also means that different social groups need different things. And that means the service delivery system needs to be, and the financing system accordingly, they need to be designed all the way through to accommodate those different needs and different constraints of vulnerable populations and excluded populations. And so you have to think about that through the whole entire planning and management and monitoring process, and not just counting how many people are included or not included of one group or another. It's not just about pushing the same thing to new groups. It's really about doing business differently. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is this point of starting with containment. I think there's a norm from rural sanitation and from kind of the health sector that maybe worked in rural sanitation, but in urban areas, the public sector, the public service planning and management has to start with containment, because containment has everything to do with whether or not your city is going to be able to achieve safe services in the end and efficient services in the end. If the containment doesn't align with the rest of the city's plan, it really limits the city's ability to deliver safe and inclusive sanitation services with the rest of the chain. And so really starting with containment, and in some cases financing containment as part of the utility service is fundamental to achieving citywide inclusive sanitation. And then finally, point 7, political will and accountability have to go together. There's a lot of emphasis on having, leadership speak up and having kind of critical voices that can bring this issue forward. But unless that personality is matched with a system of accountability, when that person leaves, the progress often is at risk of leaving as well. And so I think making sure that you think through institutionalization of all of this progress and projects from the beginning of any project or any intervention, looking at the long-term institutionalization is absolutely paramount.